On WNIN Lawmakers this week, our guests are US Senator Todd Young, as well as Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer and Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara. We'll also get an update from the Indiana General Assembly. It's all coming up next on WNIN. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with the Indiana General Assembly, let's talk with U.S. Senator Todd Young. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator.
Thank you for having me, John.
Well, good to have you here. Well, of course, big international news. Russia's attack on Ukraine continues. I know you've emphasized the need for continued sanctions against Russia. Can you talk a little bit more about the situation and the sanctions that President Biden has announced so far?
So the president has imposed sanctions on the oligarchs, the elite and very corrupt businessmen who help keep Vladimir Putin in power and steal the wealth of the Russian people. It's very important that they're sanctioned because they're key to Vladimir Putin's power structure. Some sanctions have been imposed on Vladimir Putin himself. My hope is that those sanctions will be ramped up. There have been sanctions imposed on major banks. About 80% of financial transactions within Russia are being sanctioned. But there are sanctions that have not been taken off the table and imposed yet. I think they should be in fairly short order. The entire array of sanctions need to be imposed.
What more would you like to see?
Well, I think we need to take a look at the SWIFT payment system, which allows the exchange of funds from Russia into and out of other countries. That could, if you were to cut off the SWIFT transactions by imposing sanctions, you could conceivably sever the Russian economy from the rest of the world, or at least most of the rest of the world. We should take a look at some key sectors as well, high-tech sectors that Vladimir Putin is aiming to build out within his country so that his military modernization efforts can continue.
Now, as you probably know, there have been some members of your party who have actually sort of maybe expressed some support for Putin. The former president referred to his incursion into Ukraine as genius and called him savvy. What do you think of that? Is there a split in the Republican Party on this?
You know, I think there's been a split across parties over the years. You'll recall, no doubt, that Hillary Clinton launched her now infamous reset with Vladimir Putin. So I think we have to be, irrespective of party affiliation, sober-minded, that we're dealing with a ruthless, monstrous dictator here. The only thing he really understands is power. And military power is sort of the next thing in the row after the economic sanctions that we're really going to have to draw from. I'm not suggesting that we put U.S. troops on the ground, but we can provide the wherewithal to allow the Ukrainian people to continue to carry on the fight as Russian soldiers occupy their territory.
And to emphasize, you don't believe U.S. troops should go into Ukraine or Russia, I'm guessing.
That's not something I'm advocating. Right. We can, however, and should ensure that we have a very strong presence in neighboring countries to deter Russia from, seizing additional territory, especially the territory of our allies who were, by treaty obligation, already obligated to defend.
Yeah. All right, well, some other big news happening this week. President Biden will reportedly be nominating Ketanji Brown Jackson to be the first black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. What are your thoughts on that pick?
You know, the readout of her nomination, I have not had an opportunity to study her background in detail, is that she has a strong professional background, a strong academic background, and then her temperament is one that lends itself to being on the federal bench. Those are, of course, all things that we'll have to vet very thoroughly through the confirmation process. The thing that I'll be looking most closely at, however, is her method of construing the Constitution? Does she regard it as a malleable document that she can sort of apply to current circumstances in a way that are consistent with her values or progressive values? Or instead, is she merely focused on applying the law as written to the facts of a given case? If it's not the latter, I can't be supportive of her, but I intend to be part of that very vigorous vetting process.
So would you call yourself a traditionalist when it comes to the Supreme Court and as you say, the Declaration of Independence and such?
Yes, I mean, I
should say.
Right, there are a lot of different terms, originalist, textualist, but I think, in the end, we should be applying the law as written to the facts of a given case. We don't elect judges to be legislators. That's not their job. And that's consistent with the values of the people I represent, but it's also consistent with the rule of law. If we allow appointed officials who receive lifetime appointments to insert their own values into existing laws that are passed through elected legislators, then effectively we've created a super legislature in the form of our federal court system.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to the COVID pandemic. Glad to say that cases are on the decline. Still, of course, it's still out there. Folks are still dying. What are your thoughts on how we've done as a state and a country in trying to ride out the pandemic, and what could we improve upon?
Well, we've had a lot of trial and error and a number of missteps, but also a number of correct turns and bold initiatives. This is natural. This is natural when you have a novel coronavirus. Mm-hmm. That's what COVID is. Right. This is something that it took some time to understand the nature of COVID. We're still trying to fully understand the nature of the different variants and how to best navigate the risks, the dangers associated with this. We've come a long way. It's inspired me from our researchers who've come up with new compounds to help us become resistant to the latest iterations of the disease, to our healthcare workers, and to our government officials who have done their very best. So I think on balance we've done very well as a country, especially when you compare the rate at which we've emerged from this to other countries. Much of it was made in some circles of China's response to this, but it's not all what it turned out to be, and we are poised for economic growth. We're poised to have a high rate of our population vaccinated. And we're also poised, to your point, to deal with the next pandemic. There's a punch list of different legislative items that we'll be focused on to ensure that we never, ever have to endure this sort of situation again.
What would you like to see in terms of future legislation?
Well, one of the things we learned early on, of course, is that the United States needs to be more self-sufficient as it comes to having some key medical items like personal protective equipment, masks, ventilators if necessary. So we're going to have to either warehouse those or have the capacity to produce them in short order. That's one of the things our federal government is working with other stakeholders to make sure we have. The other thing is just more resilient supply chains. When we have our extended global supply chains interrupted by a war or by some sort of natural disaster like a global pandemic, it creates cost inflation and empty shelves. And there are a number of regulations in particular that we are taking a look at and reworking so that we won't be as vulnerable to interruptions in that supply chain. That's just the economic side.
Right. In
terms of the public health side, I can't emphasize targeted investments and basic research enough. Research in the sorts of discoveries in biological sciences that will help us identify and arrest these sorts of diseases in the earliest of stages.
Right, right. Well, you've been a very tough critic of China. Could you explain the Chinese competition bill and where it stands now?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have been very hard on what I have characterized as a slaveholder state. That is People's Republic of China. China They steal our intellectual property, they steal our jobs, you might even say they steal our dreams, and they also threaten our neighbors, and they aim to threaten the United States through the development of next generation military hardware. So what I have proposed and what has passed out of the United States Senate, and I hope will soon find its way to the President's desk, is a bold increase in investment in some cutting-edge national security technologies that China is either leading in, areas like hypersonics or artificial intelligence or quantum computing, or they are very quickly gaining on the United States in terms of their innovative capacity. If the U.S. can lead the way in these national security technologies, it will not only empower our warfighters to prevent conflict and thereby defend our people and our very way of life, but these same technologies are platform technologies for the jobs of the 21st century. So there's a happy coincidence between our ability to lead the way in the development of these technologies, to grow faster, and also to have the best and most powerful military in the world. This legislation, I anticipate, if we can maintain bipartisan support in coming weeks, will pass before Memorial Day.
Some folks might look at that and say that sounds a bit like an arms race. I mean, can we afford all of that kind of military buildup?
We can't afford not to. You know, I often will think back to Ronald Reagan's adage, which is, first you figure out how much you need to spend on your military to defend our way of life, then you spend it. I mean, that's the most foundational, most fundamental role of our federal government. And so we need to find the resources to invest in this area. And I would emphasize these particular investments will lead to more economic growth, and that will bring more resources into the federal government without increasing taxes or doing other things that we often find offensive.
Yeah. All right, well, you're entering, as I understand it, the last year of your first 6-year term. What are some of your reflections at this point about the reality of being in D.C.? How have things changed since you were first elected? Just to give you a chance to reflect a bit.
Well, folks may be a bit surprised by my reflections, but this is, of course, a very polarized time in our politics. I campaigned, however, in 2016 to represent every single Hoosier. Whether they're a self-identified conservative like myself or a Republican or a liberal Democrat, I aim to represent them and represent them conscientiously, but in a manner consistent with the conservative values of most Hoosiers. Mm-hmm. I've done that. I've done that in a nonpartisan fashion. I've earned the trust and support of a lot of Hoosiers, and we are poised to get this innovation legislation done, which will benefit future generations of Hoosiers in an immeasurable way through these targeted research dollars to bring a lot of research money into Indiana, mm-hmm. and that will lead to private sector investment. So I've worked on issues that bring people together, common challenges, and Hoosiers should know that this is, I've just identified one example of those efforts. I bring that up, yes, because people need to know in this election year that I've been working hard on their behalf in a serious way, but also I want them to have confidence in their federal government. Everything is not broken. Not everyone is part of the problem. We have people able to get things done even amidst this atmosphere.
What can be done to improve the atmosphere and maybe get more bipartisanship in D.C.?
Well, we have principled disagreements, and part of my job is to make arguments on behalf of my constituents that reflects their values when we have those principled arguments. But we have to have the self-discipline not to let those principled disagreements obscure the many areas of agreement. So it takes a certain amount of self-discipline from your legislators. I believe that over a number of years I've exhibited that, and that more than anything else is really important. Tone matters. Reaching out to colleagues matters. Statesmanship still matters in this business.
All right, we will have to leave it there. Senator Todd Young, thank you so much for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it. Now here's Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith's report on the week at the State House.
A Senate committee took 8 hours of testimony and debate on a bill to eliminate the license requirement to carry a handgun in public. Those hours included impassioned testimony from State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, who sharply criticized Republicans for supporting the legislation. At the end of the committee, lawmakers gutted the bill but House and Senate GOP leaders plan to revive the original language by session's end. The latest changes to the school curriculum bill include a new requirement for the Indiana Department of Education to research and report the number of school advisory committees that already exist in the state, and a push for a legislative study committee to look into school-based mental health services. The bill cleared a Senate committee and heads to the Senate floor. And a bill that would have made it harder for state agencies to create new rules died in a Senate committee. Committee chair, Republican Senator Chip Perfect, said he largely supports the measure, but had too many issues to advance it further this year. He pledged to revisit the issue in 2023. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
Joining us now is Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer. He serves District 48, which has Pike, Spencer, and portions of Du Bois, Knox, Gibson, and Warwick counties. Senator Messmer, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here. I always appreciate the invitation to join you.
Well, thank you. Well, let's get right to it here. Now, as I'm sure you know, a third farm in Du Bois County has been hit with the avian flu. Have you been informed on what's happening with the outbreak? Any new information you can share with us?
Yeah, I get contacted or kept up to date pretty routinely with that. Just like back in 2016, they kept the legislators, pretty abreast on what was happening, and they're doing a much better job getting up front and controlling the spread this time. I think they learned a lot in 2016 on containment, on how the disease was spreading from barn to barn, and got on it much earlier this time and quicker. And the response has been handled well by the Indiana Board of Animal Health and by the farmers that are involved. I think two of them were in really close proximity. The third barn that they discovered, found this week, was about 2.5 miles away. But they're doing extensive testing within the radius of the infected barns, and trying to keep things contained and minimize people and vehicles and things that pass in and out of those contaminated zones, and they're doing a pretty great job really in keeping containment confined to a very small perimeter this time.
Can the state provide some help to these farmers who have had their flocks wiped out?
Well, I know that in 2016, the support that came from the Seger family that contracts with those farmers. I don't know if there's direct support from the state for there's a lot of resources and guidance, but the actual financial remedy came from the Seger family that contracts with them for either turkeys or chickens that have eggs. So they worked well with their growers and made sure that they were made whole for their losses of the flocks they went through.
All right. Well, let's move on to the issue of inflation. A lot of citizens, of course, are concerned about the rising cost of utilities and gas. Is there anything you can do at the state level there to alleviate this painful situation?
Unfortunately, at the state level, we don't have a lot of control on inflationary policy or regulatory policy that really controls that. That's really done, by the Fed, to a great extent, and anything that can be done, we're really limited at the state level. I mean, we can try to react to some of the little symptoms that pop up, but there's really nothing we can do to control it.
Well, in terms of utilities, though, of course, there is the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. A lot of folks here in the Evansville area are concerned about utility bills that have really spiked, those bills from CenterPoint Energy. Are there any plans to help that situation?
Well, any of those rate increases for spikes in natural gas costs, those have to be approved by the IURC. I guess there has been a pretty good jump in market rate natural gas, but that's a situation that CenterPoint really can't control. And there are procedures when they've got market prices that spike. They've got to get IURC approval to pass those on to customers. If in years past, even on the Jasper municipal gas, we've had suppliers where market prices spiked and have gone up, and ultimately those at pretty much all levels, those get passed on to the consumer, as unpleasant as that might be.
Right. Well, let's move on to another topic here. Our time is a little short. Ascension and Deaconess have requested access to the Evansville-Vanderburgh County Central Dispatch System for use by hospital police, which would essentially be a private police force. What do you think of that idea? Are you in support of that?
Well, that's an issue living up in northeast perimeters of your broadcast area. I was not aware of that request at all, and really have got no background information on it to weigh in on that issue.
Okay, all right. Well, perhaps we can chat with you on that next time.
Okay.
With just a minute or two to go here, what are some of the other things going on that you might want to mention? Maybe something you're working on at this point.
Sure. One of the bills that I've been pretty heavily involved in is House Bill 1001, as the bill came over to the Senate side of the building. Mm-hmm. And as it came over, it was pretty restrictive on businesses, and really would not have, to any great extent, allowed employers, if they felt necessary for their, at their workforce, to have a vaccine program. Mm-hmm. So we've gotten that bill rewritten quite a bit in consultation, with the House author, to get it more equally balanced between, employers in situations that need to, feel like they need to implement that, and then balancing employee protections, and really have the bill in a much better spot. We did have to exempt CMS workers. That's all been adjudicated at the Supreme Court. And if hospitals, to comply with federal mandates, they've got to have vaccine programs in those facilities. So they're not covered. It really covers a broad range of other workplace situations, and exempts professional sports venues and entertainment complexes that might have to have vaccinated workers in close proximity to the entertainers. So we've done a good job of trying to really flesh that out and come up with all of the pluses and minuses of what the House started with. Right. I've got some individual bills. I've got a
okay, I tell you what,
renewable energy siding
we
bill.
are running out of time here, Senator. I'm
okay.
so sorry. Please come back and visit us again, and we'll talk more about the
right.
bills you've got going and how things
Absolutely.
turned out this session.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Senator Messmer, for joining us today on Lawmakers. Now we're joined by Indiana State Representative Wendy McNamara. She represents most of Posey County and a portion of Vanderburgh County. Representative McNamara, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great. Well, let's get right to it here. We'd like your thoughts on bills like Indiana House Bill 1134. It would require teachers to post lessons on a website for parental review. We've seen similar bills across the country. What are your thoughts on the Indiana bill?
Well, when it was in the House, I voted against it primarily because of the onerous actions in it for all teachers. When you go into education and you have a classroom of 30 people, you're going to deal with the one person in the class that's doing something wrong. And this bill really said every teacher, started from the premise that every teacher had something to hide, and we needed to post everything. I get for parent transparency. That's very important. But current practices, and just about every school I know of, is if a parent has a question, most of my teachers say, okay, we'll add you in Google Classroom. All of my teachers do syllabi. So the things that they were asking were duplicative, but also I just didn't like the premise. The other parts of the bill, I believe, are necessary if you look around some parts of the state. But I had a lot of trouble overcoming the initial premise that all teachers were bad. And we're trying to address the actions of a few across the state. So it's undergone massive changes in the Senate. And we could take up the rest of the time trying to figure out what those are. But we'll have to see what the product looks like when it comes back.
All right, and of course we should point out you do work for the Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation. And while we're speaking of education, of course, I don't have to tell you, we are facing a teacher shortage across the state. What do you think can or could or should be done to alleviate that problem?
Over the past 4 to 5 years, we've recognized that, and we have teacher scholarships available to students who want to go into education. They will pay for their education, and all they need to do is agree to teach in an Indiana school. I believe it's for the next 5 years. And continuously since the day I've been in office, we have funded education at historic rates. Nearly every school corporation in the state of Indiana received a significant amount of money in the last biennial budget, and most teachers saw raises across the state. So salary increases, historical investment in education has been something we have done throughout my tenure. But one thing to encourage more people to get involved in education is to come back to the idea of the professionalism of it, and have those conversations with kids who are interested in sharing. It's, in my view, it's a lot like a service to your community and service to your state. Education is the foundation of what we do as Americans, and it's essentially important in everything that we do.
Do you feel that teachers are paid well enough in Indiana? Could they be paid more?
The salaries are determined locally by their districts. You would have to look at district by district, but I will tell you, in comparison, everybody received raises this year, nearly every corporation across the state. So we've invested a lot of money in education, but the local salaries are determined locally.
Let's move on to another part of the education picture this legislative session. The governor, Eric Holcomb, he signaled some support this past week for some bills that moved through the legislature, such as the one that would ban transgender girls from taking part in K through 12 girls' school sports. What are your thoughts on the version of this bill in Indiana?
I don't know how it stands in the Senate. I don't believe they made changes to it. I supported it in the House, and I look at it as a fairness issue. When you talk about competition in sports, a lot of girls' sports, this might be their only opportunity to get a scholarship to college, and we want to make sure fairness ensues. And I believe that bill gives us that fairness that we're asking for in sports, and it's strictly for girls' sports. I believe it should be signed by the governor. I'm supportive of that, but for me, it comes down to a fairness issue when it comes down to competition and making sure that people have all the opportunities to participate on a level playing field.
All right, I believe our time is running out. We're squeezing in 3 guests today, so I'm afraid that'll probably have to do it for this particular show. But thank you so much, Representative McNamara, for joining us. Hope to see you again soon. And I'd like to thank all of our guests on this week's episode of Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for joining us for WNIN Lawmakers.